Family, so we're continuing our conversation on Emerson, student of Harvard, essayist, poet, philosophical mind. So he continues in the I find something more dear and connotent than in the streets or villages, in the tranquil landscape, and especially in the distant line of the horizon, man beholds somewhat as beautiful as his own nature. The greatest delight which the fields and woods minister is the suggestion of an occult relation between man and vegetable. So, what I like about this is that he talks about the line of the horizon. And a good example of that for me was the other day I went and I walked by the ocean and I just stared out into the distance. And it feels really relaxing to the mind sometimes when you can just look at a horizon that feels endless and it feels like it's like sucking all that negative energy out of you, just like a mass void. Instead of just like I compare that to when I lived in the hoods of Philly where you look out your window and it's literally just a brick wall of your neighbor and there is no yards. There wasn't, the buildings are right next to each other, one-way streets. Your view out your window is just another building. To your side, just another building and a small walkway. There wasn't that many trees in nature, and it can get really congested at times, and that can make someone feel more depressed. I think people get more depressed in the city than they do in the nature. You can get bored in nature, but depression for some maybe is less. I think that's what he's getting at. And the nature as beautiful as his own. So the nature of the spirit maybe is what he's getting at. He also continues further in his chapter 2, Commodity. Nature in its ministry to man is not only the material, but also the process and the result. All the parts incessantly work in each other's hands for the profit of man. The wind sows the seed, the sun evaporates the sea, the wind blows the vapor to the fields, the ice on the other side of the planet condenses rain on this. The rain feeds the plant feeds the animal, and thus the endless circulations of the divine charity nourish man. Yeah, I agree with that. Nature is definitely something that ministers to you, as in can give you life advice. It can make you reflect on yourself. There's a lot of spiritual elements to nature and being in nature. I mean, we were hunter gatherers at a time. We had no electricity. We were out there. Regardless of if you're in the wonderful Amazon of Brazil or the wonderful deserts of, sub-Sahara Africa, if you're in the Tibetan Himalayan mountains dealing with the snow, right? Regardless, there is a presence of seeing wonderful mountains and beautiful fields and soft hills covered in daisies, or even a scary forest, right? A half dead burned one still has its own beauty. So I agree with that. And I can definitely understand where he's coming from. And how he talks about the cycles of, in geography you don't just learn about the things of like, oh, this country is where the capital is this. No, you actually learn about cloud formation and climatology, that is climates, right? And weather patterns and how tornadoes are made and how hurricanes form. So plate tectonics, orogeny, you learn a little bit about mountain building, how mountains are formed. You learn a lot about volcanoes, that and in geology. So when he points out the circulations of the earth, right, the whole process, it's scientifically correct, but he's using it in a philosophical sense too, and a spiritual sense. So I agree with that. He continues, the useful arts are reproductions or new combinations by the wit of man, of the same natural benefactors. He no longer waits for favoring gales, but by means of steam. He realizes the fable of Aeolus's bag, and carries the 32 winds in the boiler of his boat. To diminish friction, he paves the road with iron bars, and mounting a coach with shipload of men, animals, and merchandise behind him, he darts through the country from town to town like an eagle or a swallow through the air. By the aggregate of these aids, How is the face of the world changed from the era of Noah to that of Napoleon? It's true. Humans in their own sense are sort of, bird wandering around, floating around, and acting and participating in, nature and its whole system. So I get that. I mean, how do you feel about, art and nature and the humans, interacting within it? Sort of reminds me how bees operate on a hive. So I can see that. And the useful arts are reproductions and new combinations of the wit. So useful art. So what is art? That's a very philosophical question. I believe that he can mean this to be an engine could be art. It's beautiful to look at. Engineers would probably say that. A space shuttle is a work of art in its own right, and it is useful, and by the wit of the people designing it, it is able to function and take you where you need to go. Art can be, it's definitely sculpture. So let's say the statue of David, Michelangelo, he definitely had some wits about him when he was, crafting that, to get the juxtaposition of the hips right, to get the muscular parts of the statue anatomically correct, and smoothing out the marble to where it is, so grand to look at for the human eye. So I definitely see that. What do you say, family? What would you say about the useful arts and their reproductions, and how that such an art is a natural benefit to humans? I definitely think that art in and of itself is very valuable to humans. I don't know, it's a very beautiful thing to end on.